Good evening, good afternoon, good middle of the night, good whatever time you found this. I'm Jo, and this is Anxiety Addicts Bedtime Stories, where we take embarrassing, silly, ridiculous, sometimes awful stories from around the internet, or they get DM'd to our inbox of people doing kind of awful, funny, embarrassing, ridiculous things, and we turn them into 20-minute tales to help you take your mind off of all of the insanity that's going on outside your bedroom door and focus on somebody else's problems. So tune in, tune out. We don't know how you found us on the internet, but we're very happy you're here. And this is one of my absolute favorite stories, which I always say, but it's a really good one. And it's called If You Try Sometimes, You Just Might Find You Get What You Need. And it's sweeter than most of our stories, so keep that in mind. Some lives don't start out super exciting, especially when you're an Italian girl in a suburb of northern New Jersey. But maybe get lucky. Maybe your mother's brother, Uncle Phillip, moves to town. First, some backstory. Andrea's mom and dad immigrated through Ellis Island in Sicily right after the Second World War. Her mother became the neighborhood's most sought-after seamstress, at one point working in the most exclusive wedding dress shop on Madison Avenue. Her father worked as a welder, joined the union, and managed to retire with a pension and 9 fingers. In a lot of ways, it was the American dream, but it wasn't Andrea's. She tried to make every day more interesting. In grade school, that landed her in the principal's office. In middle school, it was a 3-day suspension. By high school, she narrowly avoided booking charges, only because, well, she was really, really pretty. And that was in 1966. That was when Uncle Phillip, her mother's younger brother, moved to the city. And that was when, and how, this all started. From what Andrea was told, Phillip enlisted in the Navy and spent years in Europe. The way her parents discussed him, occasionally in hushed voices and then as a warning to their mischievous teenage daughter, military service was not a great fit for her uncle. She heard once from a distant cousin at Thanksgiving that he had tried to throw the ship's captain overboard and was discharged due to mental health issues, or whatever they called it back then. Instead of buying a home with a white picket fence upon his return to American soil, Uncle Phillip used his GI money to, this is true, study ballet with the late and very famous choreographer Jacques d'Ambrose. Andrea was told with genuine pride by a great aunt that her uncle had, quote unquote, the highest leap of anyone in the class. When she heard that he was moving close by, Andrea was, rightly, convinced that this family member was going to be her ticket to a significantly more colorful life. In her Vidal Sassoon hair and white snake jacket, Andrea became a regular fixture at her uncle's apartment. Because, for one thing, Andrea's downtown public high school was so overcrowded and understaffed that teachers mostly didn't bother with attendance. This was the second reason that Andrea stopped going. The first is that she was a very bright girl and thusly, in those tightly packed classrooms, a very bored one. Uncle Philip's apartment was one Marlboro cigarette break away. Andrea would arrive at the door of his third-story walk-up, knock twice, and then let herself in, as Philip had lost his key a week after he signed the lease and never bothered to replace it. "What a burglar's gonna take?" he'd ask Andrea, shrugging his broad shoulders and raising his dark unibrow so that he looked a bit like Ernie from Sesame Street. His penchant for widely striped sweaters only furthered this illusion. Yes, it was meant to be a rhetorical question, but not to Andrea. Uncle Philip allowed her to open all the drawers in the pantry and take what she wanted, and only one of them had cookies. As far as she was concerned, there was a whole hell of a lot in Philip's apartment that anyone might want to take. On his shelves, where there should have been jars of sugar and flour, there were, instead, lots of 60s drugs. Weed and hash and Valium and Quaaludes. These are the kind of treats she and other visitors would randomly uncover while foraging for a bag of potato chips. And he was very generous. So very generous. And he was always game to roll a joint and light up in the middle of the afternoon while his niece should have been in the 4th row of Classroom C of Abraham Lincoln High School learning calculus. No matter how stoned they got, Uncle Philip would insist that they sit down and do her homework together. She got a B+. It could have been an A, but her teacher noted her lack of class participation. Andrea began to bring her friends over to Philip's apartment, and everyone would get high and listen to war stories and vinyl records. This went on for a few years. During that time, Andrea memorized the Beatles catalog, as well as the Doors and Sly and the Family Stone. She learned about the war and the old country and met many of Uncle Philip's friends and girlfriends who all seemed to be comfortable pushing open his unlocked door at any time, night or day. In retrospect, Andrea learned more on the smoky afternoons about history and the world than she ever would have in a classroom. And even though she managed to pull her grades together senior year and get into an Ivy League school, the one in Pennsylvania, she still looked to Phillip to fill that void of excitement, a feeling that would creep up and overtake her no matter how much she tried to shut it out. When she was married with 2 children in her 20s, holed up in a tiny apartment on the Lower East Side while she worked on her dissertation, Easter rolled around, sneaking up on the young mom. She was exhausted, broke, frazzled, and newly single. It was too much, and it could have been her breaking point. The moment she realized that she hadn't bought chocolate or eggs or confetti was when the phone rang. It was, of course, Uncle Phillip. No sooner had she tearfully explained her situation when she heard the words that she hadn't known how badly she needed to hear. "Don't you worry, sweetheart. I'll be right there." And right there he was. But in true Uncle Phillip style, he was not alone. Yes, there was a woman on his elbow, dressed in head-to-toe daytime sequins. But there was also a large box, and the large box was wiggling. Inside were 19 baby chicks. Yes, 19. And in his arms, a bunny. Yes, a bunny. Before Andrea could protest at the sight of farm animals in her New York City one-bedroom apartment, her girls were at the door shrieking in absolute joy. Andrea was outnumbered and knew she couldn't turn away her uncle, or his chicks, or the bunny. As she closed the door behind the menagerie, she simultaneously cursed and thanked Phillip. Because even with her now totally chaotic life, Andrea still craved excitement. A few years later, he invited Andrea, her girls, and her new boyfriend out to his new home on Long Island. Andrea was grateful for the break in the day-to-day life of work and studying and raising children. At his invitation, she looked forward to something different to do on a Saturday night, an excuse to get out of the city. When they arrived, Phillip gave them a tour of his new digs. On the phone, Andrea had noticed her uncle becoming increasingly eccentric, but she hadn't understood the extent of it until she stepped foot into his living room. Everything was covered in tinfoil. Every surface, every sofa, every lamp, every table. Only the shag carpet under her white boots had been spared. The girls thought it looked like a palace. Andrea was terrified. The new boyfriend tried, unsuccessfully, to run out through the back door. "What's going on here?" Andrea tried to keep her voice even. It was a challenge. Uncle Phillip gestured with a huge smile to his magnetic seating area. "Isn't she lovely? I did it all myself." Andrea hadn't actually considered whether he might have hired an interior decorator to design the metal-covered mess. She didn't know whether or not to be concerned. She'd relied on this man for a decade and a half to bring the drama and the fun into her world. Isn't that exactly what he was doing? Was he going off the deep end? Possibly. Quite possibly. But at least he wasn't trying to contact aliens with the tinfoil as an antenna. Maybe he was genuinely flexing his interior design muscles. Still, all that crinkling when she sat on the couch was hard to ignore. It was only a year or so after that visit when Andrea got the news that her uncle was diagnosed with cancer. "We have to have a big Christmas," declared Andrea, hanging up the phone with her sister, and she immediately invited Phillip. Once Andrea put her mind to something, nothing could get in her way. She spent the next 5 weeks scouring the city for the most over-the-top Christmas decorations that she could find. She invited family from all over the tri-state area. She prepped and chopped and cooked and baked. When people walked through the door of Andrea's new 3-bedroom apartment, there were lights and sweets and tinsel. She had to pause before that purchase since it reminded her of her uncle's apartment. And candle overload. Everyone was wowed. especially Uncle Phillip and the new woman in purple who trailed him from room to room. Even in his last season of life, Phillip still had it. The wine flowed freely in the kitchen. Other things flowed from Phillip's pockets. Andrea felt herself turning into a child, continuously glancing at the stacks of presents underneath the tree. She knew that this was most likely the last Christmas with her cherished uncle, and she couldn't wait to see what he had concocted for what he probably understood was his parting gift. She sunk into a velvet armchair, a newly acquired piece purchased on layaway that she'd shopped specifically for this night. She took in the noise and chatter and smells and chaos of her cozy new home filled with people she both loved and tolerated. She took a brief trip down memory lane, listing all the incredible gifts that she'd received from him. There were, of course, the joints and the music, the concert t-shirts and the impromptu trips to Atlantic City. There was the jewelry of unclear origins and once a red convertible that he had to take back after a month. This man and his presents were, as far as Andrea was concerned, the stuff of legends. She felt like a little girl when her cousin herded the family to the tree after dinner for the gift-giving part of the night. She scanned the big and little boxes for her name scribbled in Philip's shockingly perfect script. She tried to wait patiently as the kids opened their dolls and remote-control cars and new blue jeans. She reminded herself that she was an adult. The presents were silly and childish. She chastised the butterflies swimming around her stomach as she watched her uncle hand out shiny boxes wrapped with ribbon. She held her breath when he approached her with a shoebox and a shit-eating grin. Andrea took her time unwrapping the box, savoring the moment. She felt him hover over her shoulder as she gingerly slid her finger through the paper, her palm becoming just the tiniest bit sweaty. The plaid iridescent paper fell to the carpeted floor. Inside was a box that had once contained mousetraps. Somehow, that made the possibility of the contents even more intriguing. She looked up at the man who had done so much for her, who had saved her from more than he would ever know. She glanced at her daughters, who gazed at him adoringly, clearly also anticipating the gift for their mother. Andrea moved slowly, drawing out the moment as much as she could, feeling surrounded by love and warmth and that special holiday feeling. She lifted off the top of the cardboard mousetrap box and allowed her eyes to look inside where there was a very, very large rubber band ball. A ball of rubber bands. There could have been thousands, but the plummeting of Andrea's heart took all of her attention, and she didn't bother to count or estimate the number. She looked to her uncle. His smile was one of pure joy. There wasn't even the glimmer of a prank. "Thank you," was all that she could muster. The fumes of her disappointment gathered in her heart and condensed in her eyes. It wasn't that she was expecting the Hope Diamond in the mousetrap box. It was that Uncle Philip's magic was something she'd been counting on for weeks and dreading losing forever. The heavy, oversized rubber band ball sat like a dead weight in her lap. She watched as the younger kids ripped open their train sets and Barbie dolls. She smelled the pie her aunt had just pulled out of the oven and listened to a few of the teenagers bang on the old piano. One of those senses pushed her to cry, to full-on sob. And that's the great thing about a great family. No one asked Andrea what was the matter or seemed put off by her tears. They simply put their arms around her and let her let it out. She glanced up at Phillip, feeling his eyes on her as she melted into a puddle on the new velvet cushions. "Time for me to go, dollface." He pulled her up from the chair, his frame feeling smaller and more fragile than she remembered. He wrapped her in a hug that she knew she wouldn't forget. He put his hands on her shoulder and looked her right in the face with total sincerity and asked, "So, pretty great present, huh?" For years following, Andrea would keep the rubber band ball in the kitchen, needing it for various projects with the kids. She'd absent-mindedly moved it to her office, using it to hold together large pieces of mail and folders. It took a long time, seriously decades, for the ball to run out. A band here to hold together the broken doorknob, another there to hold together the potato chip bag. Many, many used for holding together rolls of the architectural plans that had become her business. You never know how badly you need a bunch of rubber bands until you need a bunch of rubber bands. And Andrea finally had a moment. A stop in your tracks, the wind knocked out of you moment. She got it. She finally got it. She wished she'd had the moment earlier, years earlier, but it wasn't until she was down to her last solitary rubber band that she froze, the band in her hand, when she realized what Uncle Phillip had really done for her. Sure, he'd given her so many fabulous material gifts, but what he truly gifted were the memories of him, and that all that he had taught her about history and life and friends and people and memories and choices and love. Those lessons that she could count on for the rest of her life. And then, through a freaking rubber band ball, he'd managed to stay in it, stay close to her for another 17 years. Yes, Phillip made life more exciting. But it was because he taught her where to find meaning. And that, on this dark insomniac night, is what it's all about. Sweet dreams. So these are Anxiety Addicts Bedtime Stories. If you like what you watched or heard, send us a DM. Please subscribe, give us all the stars, and sweet dreams.